durability and structure to that the fingers.
Mhm.
Without welting in there, that leather will eventually rip. So it adds an extra layer of durability in there. And today there are a lot of times they're like, this is split welting, which is what most gloves were for 100 years. And it's really become popular to have a rolled welt.
Okay.
Where they take the top grain of leather and you have like really flashy colors, like we were talking about, a hand stall and the finger stalls. They got the shell and then the back fingers. So for me, when I make this glove, I always make the hand stall first. Then I put the shell together with the fingers, and then you put the padding in, and then you put your hand stall in, and it all kind of comes together.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining in for the second part of our interview with Casey Mack. If you remember, Casey runs his company, Mack Provisions, where he repairs and builds gloves completely with the skills that he possesses as an industrial sewer. And he also crafts wallets out of vintage ball glove leather as well, as we mentioned on our last podcast as well. So the last episode that we had, we discussed the history of baseball gloves and what we call today vintage gloves. It was awesome. I loved being on that. Just in the moment. That was a fantastic podcast. So thank you again for joining us for this second episode.
Yeah.
And today we're kind of going to be zoning in on Casey's craft of building baseball gloves. So let's start out. And making a baseball glove is pretty easy, right?
It's so easy. Anybody can do it. Anybody. You can do it. Everybody can do it.
I know.
I actually think people should.
More people?
I think we've lost here in the United States the ability to make things. It's all been sent overseas, and I'm like proudly a part of the community of people who make stuff in America. It's kind of a dying thing. So yes, if you have any desire, like reach out to me. I'll help you in any way I can remotely. You know what I mean?
I really like that. I think in America as well, we can't appreciate even if we make something that's crappy. Like it's like, hey, you made something, like that's really cool. And people think that like the first time they do it, they have to like build the most perfect
no, you should see my first wallets.
Really?
Yeah, it looks bad.
But it was awesome.
You got to start somewhere, right?
That's right.
You start somewhere, you learn how to make things. And luckily, I've worked at some places where I got to learn a lot of stuff, a lot about the sewing and manufacturing industry that like translates into how to make a glove. So we'll go over that today.
And that's fun though, because we also, for those, we got Chris Petroff, for those that know him, he's sitting in the background here. I feel like the everybody's first time that they redo a baseball glove, they get excited like to relace it. They just rip everything out and then they get there like, oh, I have no idea what I'm doing now. This is real. But that's great. That's a good place. You have to do it the first time.
That's it's all on the first episode, I probably should have said that it all started for me like age 13. I walked to a cobbler and picked up lace to restring my glove. And he gave me like this thickest leather. He like repaired Birkenstocks. He wasn't really nice. So I think he just gave me something to get me out of there.
Get you out of there.
Like, I was just like, tell me how to do this. So, but yeah, that's all. It's for me, like working on a glove all started with relacing it. And I think for a lot of people, that's where it's at. It's one of the things that you can pull out and redo. It's nice. So,
yeah, that's awesome. So a few years back, I did a little research and I chronicled what I think are like the 8 basic steps of building a glove.
Right.
And I'm sure I was wrong as
I've read that. It's pretty accurate.
Really?
Nice. I'm not like an expert ball glove maker. I make them, but it's not like I'm, Wilson or Rawlings or a factory or, a big thing. But yeah, pretty much. Yeah. It kind of summed it up for me.
And we'd probably get blue in the face if we went through all 8 steps.
Yeah.
But I thought we could dive in on a couple of them.
I can. Yeah.
So,
and I brought examples.
Why don't we just start off? So Casey, show us your vintage glove, or I guess show off. This one's really cool. So this is one that Casey makes. This is more of like a performance style glove.
It's a modern pattern for sure.
So
So just to break it down, you have your shell. The shell has 2 sides. You've got your fingers, your web, and then your hand stall. So your hand stall has finger stalls. And to marry those 2 things together, you stick it inside the glove and it's all put together with edge binding. And that's kind of like a really, really quick way to put it together. Everything's sewn together with a traditional welt, a split welt,
So what is that? Why don't you share? I'm sure there's a lot of people out there like welting. They hear welting.
Right.
What does welting do? That was hard for me to find out when I first started
Yeah,
like
it
working around
adds
gloves.
stability and structure to that the fingers.
Hmm.
Without welting in there, that leather will eventually rip. So it adds an extra layer of durability in
Hmm.
there. And
And
today there are a lot of times they're like this is split welting, which is what most gloves were for 100 years,
yeah,
and it's really become popular to have a rolled welt where
okay.
they take the top grain of leather and you have like really flashy colors like we were talking about earlier today.
Yeah. And so for those that aren't watching, so yeah, the welting is
Yeah.
so like very commonly usually on the fingers of a glove, it's that line, I guess,
Yep.
that you
In
notice
between.
running up. And on a lot of Wilson gloves, they have what's called dual welting, where they actually have
There you go.
two lines
Yep.
of that welting. And
Yep.
so it basically keeps that, like if you didn't have this leather would just rip apart pretty
Right,
easily
correct. It
over
would
time.
rip it apart, and it's important to have these seams here because, and we'll go into it on some of the patterns that I've cut out. Like especially on fingers, they're shaped in a certain way that when you sew them together, it creates that curvature like
Okay.
around a glove. So you'll take two pieces that are curved in opposite directions, sew them together,
Mhm.
and they create a natural curve. And that's part of why welting is here. It also helps
Gotcha.
create this round shape to catch a ball.
Okay.
And same everywhere. Everywhere where there's that welting, it helps take two pieces that are kind of opposite looking and it kind of curves together as you sew. So there's tons of tick marks when you're laying out a pattern. This is throughout all sewing industries. You'll
Mhm.
have certain measurements you have to hit. Wherever I've worked, they've always called it tick marks. You put little marks on your pattern that you know that those two pieces on opposing sides of this the material, they have to meet when they, and if they don't, they're not going to fit right. Like the fit of the glove is going to feel weird because it's off.
Mhm.
So it's important that everything's measured right and everything fits together right.
Gotcha. This is great. I'm going to show this to our customer experience department here at Gloves. I'm going to have that was really helpful on the welting there. So I'm going to have to let them know about that
Yeah.
so that they
Yeah,
can
yeah.
have that's a great talking point.
Yeah.
So one thing that I don't think a lot of baseball players fans know. So when a baseball glove is first made, like they cut. You obviously know this, but you don't think about it. They cut. It's flat leather, is what it is
Right,
when
right.
you get it. So
Yeah,
he
it's
has. Why don't
flat.
you go ahead and pull this?
Yeah, so I actually, because I like vintage gloves, I make a oops, sorry.
Oh, you're good.
I make a 1940s replica. And so for us here today, I brought in all the
So if you want to
materials.
hand me, I'll hold the
Gotcha.
glove up and you can hold up the cuts.
Gotcha. So back in the day, like we were talking on episode 1, gloves were manufactured to just the your fingers to bend down and your pinky and your thumb would stay kind of like this. So this is something that the padding that I made for that replica glove.
Basically showing for those listening, it's like you were designed to catch in the palm.
Right
Is
in the
where you
palm.
were
Yep,
catching.
yep, yep. It's traditionally just like right here where this section is where they were intended to catch a ball.
Mhm.
So that's all 100% wool felt.
And he's got the internals right now. He was showing that the padding on how this 1940s glove is made. So
Right. And so this is the shell. So technically, this is how it would kind of look. I know this is kind of hard on a podcast, but
it's
this
okay.
is the shell.
That's why
This
we
is
have
where
the YouTube.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, go watch it on YouTube. So that would be the shell where your hand goes inside. And if I pull, I've got everything marked here. Let me find my pieces. I mark all mine. So like on the backside, I put an R for ring.
Uh-huh.
And you see that's what's actually going to go over the ring finger.
Okay.
And to make it fit, you cut it a little bit wider at the towards the knuckles of your finger so that you can actually have all that room for your hand to fit in. And so if we're looking at this,
Mhm.
it kind of creates that open shape
Yeah.
to get sewn on there. And
Mhm.
so I kind of sew this in a daisy chain with welting. This is a cool design because the pinky itself kind of rolls over,
Mhm.
whereas today most gloves have a welt there. But
Okay.
this actually has a rolled edge
Okay.
and sews together on that to make a pinky.
Gotcha. So
Yeah.
he's talking about
Yeah,
right there.
exactly.
So it's pretty cool for those listening. So he's showing he's like showing how these individual pieces of leather connect together
Right.
on the glove to
Right.
create it.
Yeah.
How many pieces does it take to
Oh,
build this?
I should have counted.
Oh, you're good. Sorry, you could ballpark.
I would say 20.
20.
20, right? Like you have the internal compartments, and then which is what we'd call a hand stall and the finger stalls. They got the shell and then the back fingers. So for me, when I make this glove, I always make the hand stall first. Then I put the shell together with the fingers, and then you put the padding in, and then you put your hand stall in, and it all kind of comes together.
Gotcha.
Yeah, there's a lot of shapes. It's very cool. Yeah, all over here, like this is the ring. There is tick marks that I have kind of marked right there.
So what is a tick mark?
A tick mark is where I want stitching to start or stop,
Okay.
where I want something to match up. The welting needs to match up right on this certain part. Otherwise, it's not going to fit right. So you can see on the back side that welting that pulls the fingers together.
Right here.
They meet up about halfway up the finger, as you can see.
Yeah.
And a lot of gloves, even today, look like that. They have welting that kind of ends right there, kind of towards the base of the finger. A lot of Japanese gloves even have that today.
Really?
Japanese made, which is like the industry standard for quality today.
And so when you're sewing these shells together, you're no longer doing hand sewing. This is you're using an industrial sewing machine.
Yeah.
Right?
So I have it's a Consew 227 a Japanese made machine, which is also a standard for quality. Japanese made sewing machines is like the best in the business. So I have a cylinder machine, and so I personally think if you're going to make a ball glove, having a cylinder head is what they call it. It's a machine head that has an arm that comes out and that you can sew around it. Whereas a flatbed machine, it's very hard to, in my opinion, make it. Like I've talked to Chris about Nakona. They a lot of times everything's made on a flatbed, which I just can't see.
Okay.
And he and I've talked about this, that it makes more sense to sew things on a cylinder just because it's a round, you can sew things in a round shape, which is a ball glove. Everything needs to be round. So
nice.
Yeah.
And so the way that what you're eventually going to arrive with all these pieces. So you're going to have your shell,
right?
And you actually, is it sewed inside out?
It
first?
is. You're exactly
okay.
Yeah, I'm glad you're saying that.
And then with your hand stall, is that's sewed outside? It's like regular style. Is that correct?
Yeah, correct. So, so if we're looking at the hand stall, you're going to sew things face to face, which is going to be the top grain of the skin. They're going to be face to face. So when you put your hand on it, you're going to feel top grain all the way around. Whereas the shell, it's going to be totally sewn inside out.
Okay.
So anybody who's made a glove, I would probably say the hardest part to making a glove is flipping it inside and out, especially depending on the leather. Like these vintage styles are super easy, but when you get into gloves that have
go ahead, show. This is another glove that Casey's made here.
Yeah.
So this is the King Griffey. This is modeled after like the King Griffey Jr. style glove.
Yeah. He rocked a TB24 named after him. This is very similar in design, but these really long fingers, they're sewn totally inside out, and you have to use some specialty equipment to flip them right side out, and that's labor of love.
You're pushing down really hard.
You're I've got these tools. I started out with a broom handle, and I've now worked my way up and kind of fashioned some other tools where it's really easy just to push with some cloth down and flip them inside out. It's in my opinion, sewing welting and flipping them inside out are the hardest things to do.
Hardest thing. So you probably got some strong forearms, I feel like, from having to do that work.
My mom said eat some spinach. We'll be good.
There you go. That's that's really cool. I think a lot of people don't realize that it's inside out, and then
it's sewn inside out,
and then you'll end up with you'll end up with the shell, and you'll end up with I like to call it the inner hand liner, because I don't think that hand liner always matches with everybody's brain. Right.
I know, it's that's one of the hardest things, because like Chris and I call it a hand stall, but I've heard it called a palm liner, or like what you just said.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's like an actual codified language on exactly what it's called.
Yeah.
But there's two separate pieces there.
Yeah.
Right.
And then from there, it kind of makes sense, and you just like marry those pieces together.
And that's another thing, like getting those to sit really well
Mhm.
You can go on YouTube. Like there's a lot of companies that, like in Korea and Japan, they have full on. They're making the glove and they show every process, and it's
Uh-huh.
been really enlightening for me because they use steam and heat, and leather's super pliable when it's warmed up,
Yeah.
and so there's a lot of shape and um, it taking it form from using heat. So if you, I'm trying to figure out the wording for here. There's specifically do you have these aluminum? They look like hands. They're big aluminum hands that are about the length of a glove, and they can heat them up. And so
Mhm.
they put the glove and with the hand stall inside of it, and it heats it up so it takes form
Okay.
around that shape. And that's really where a glove starts to really come together.
I think, Nakona has a decent video that
Shows that
shows,
process.
like, that kinda that it shows the hand very
Right, right.
distinctly that you would use.
Yeah, exactly. It's a
It
piece of aluminum and it gets really warm.
Yeah.
Right, Chris? Yeah.
And it's really neat too. Even the big companies here in the United States, they don't they're very brief, but they do have, if you wanna get, like, the general gist of
Mhm.
how that making a
Right.
glove works, they do a pretty good job. It's enough to whet your palate if you don't wanna
Yeah.
dive into, like, a really long video
Yeah.
or something.
Gosh. And I don't have one of those. So I'm mostly doing it the kind of, I would probably call it the old school way. I've
Okay.
got a couple pieces of aluminum, or I have some custom made pieces of wood that
You got, like, a fire underneath your alumina.
yeah,
You're
I'm
like
I'm I'm stoking a
Yeah.
fire. It's like the 1800s. That's how it's all made,
Uh-huh.
kind of old school like that, right? But
That's
yeah,
cool.
it's I kind of do it an older way because it's I just don't have the capital to get those very special tools.
Yeah.
So yeah, kind of the old school way.
But it is pretty cool if you look at I mean, it's cool that you can do the 1940s that I got right here,
Hmm.
and then you got the modern glove
Kind of
as
a
well
modern
with the
glove.
King Griffey Jr.
Yeah, yeah,
And then
exactly.
and he's even got, like, this modern
Yep,
infield glove right
yep,
here,
yep,
which is the tan leather with the blue lace on this
yep.
one
Yeah, that's
is
not
pretty
Ball Glove
fantastic.
X, but it's close. It's got
Okay.
kind of like an old school feel to it. It kind of
Mhm.
reminds me of gloves that I've seen from the 70s
Mhm.
that Rawlings was using. But yeah, yeah, it's an interesting thing. Like it takes me about, I'd say from start to finish without lace, about 4 hours.
Okay.
And I'm pretty slow. Like that's real slow. If you ever look at a factory floor making gloves,
Yeah.
they've got people, and it makes sense. If you go to any place that makes things like this, they've got a person at a station just sewing one thing. And
Okay.
that's kind of a huge efficiency. So if you've got a whole crew of making anything, they're going to sew the same thing over and over and over. Like the welting, you'll have
Yeah.
somebody just making it like that. And so I do it just because I'm by myself. I do it the really, really slow way, start to finish by myself.
Mhm. So it
Um,
takes you about you said 4 hours to
yeah,
put everything
yeah.
together,
Yeah,
and
but
then
there's coffee,
That's right,
and
yeah.
then I'll go in and talk to my wife, pet my cat. It's definitely a labor of love, but it's kinda cool. I get to be in my garage and make things that are usable, you know what I mean?
Yeah. So, I am interested, and I think you mentioned this a little bit earlier, but, when you're creating the glove,
Mhm.
like, so what is when you're crafting a glove, for you, what is the part that is the absolute hardest
Ooh,
part for you
I know. We
when you're
talked about this. It's
Uh-huh.
so if you look down there, I've called it a V. I don't know what else to call it, but it's the part in between the index and the middle finger, and between the middle finger and the ring, that
Yeah.
very bottom part,
Yeah, I'd call it like a notch or
that
something
notch,
like that right
that
in there.
turn, if it's not sewn right,
Uh-huh.
you could miss it. There's a lot of things. You could either miss it, or you could barely touch the welting on there. Um, there's a lot of things that go into that turn. If it's not sewn right, your pattern's gonna shift.
Okay.
So you have to hit exact points. And sometimes because you're turning, that needle stitch length gets smaller. And when you got needle holes that are right next to each other, it'll kind of like nick the top grain. So if you pull apart the fingers between
Mhm.
that Rawlings, you can see that there's some of that you can see inside the suede part of the leather. And it, it Chris and I do all kinds of repairs on that specific part of a glove.
Really?
Comes apart a lot. We have to try to do our best to fix it. But yeah,
Gotcha.
that in between is difficult.
Gotcha.
I made a lot of uglies before I got halfway decent at it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I'm just interested with this as well because you're discussing like the hardest part of crafting a glove.
Yeah.
And you're a professional sewer at this point. But I imagine at some point there was like a leaping off, like where you're like, dude, I am 100% doing this.
Yeah.
We had an earlier example where, people that want to relace a baseball glove, you get excited on your first one and you rip it all the lace out. You're like, oh man, I didn't inventory any of that. And you lipped off. Did you have a point like that with making gloves? You're like, oh man, like this is for real.
Yeah. Shout out to Marcus. From memory, I've talked to him a lot about how much waste goes into like learning or making things. Even the thread, like you pull out your stuff from the machine and you cut off this much thread, and you're like, I've wasted that much. But yeah, there was a point, and this might kind of get like broad, but there was a point in my life where I wasn't doing this full time. Now that I'm coming back to it, it's like I'm gonna do this. I want to make gloves.
Yeah.
And so just to be able to work at my own home and do it at my own pace and really dive in and learn just sets me up to do it right. You know what I mean? So there was a point maybe about a year ago where I was like, I can do this. I could really just make things like this. So I've gone to school probably the last year. So yeah.
Nice. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us for these past 2 episodes. I before all of our guests, before they leave, we always do three strikes. So we got 3 questions for you. A little more creative.
And I purposely didn't look at these.
You didn't look. All right.
No, wait. Let me take that back. I looked, but I've forgotten. So we'll
there we go.
See how it goes.
Let's see how it goes. So, all right, our first strike. So the thing we always say, you have 20 seconds, like the pitch clock, but you take as long as you want. But for the first strike, so for me personally, sewing is kind of scary. So have you ever sustained a sewing injury that you can share with us?
I remember. Yes. Recently.
Oh.
I've not been a very accident prone guy. I sew very slow. For me, I turn the machine way down. You can on a newer motor, you can turn the machine down to stitch really slow. But not sewing, like knock on wood, I've not hurt myself with a needle.
Okay.
But I about cut my finger off.
Okay.
Taking apart a glove.
Okay.
And I just sliced my finger, felt bone.
Oh,
and my nail is starting to grow back. I was showing you guys
earlier.
You
have to show if you can get it close to. Is it your middle finger? Oh, whoops.
So what do I do? Like this?
Yeah.
My middle finger. It's growing out right now. It's to the point where the new finger's growing in, but it looks messed up.
Really? Oh,
my wife looks at it. She goes, "What?"
Oh man.
She gives me a lot of crap for it. But yes, I've hurt myself. It's weird. I've even when hand stitching, I've thrown. Like you go to grab the needle, so you throw your needle through your leather and you go to grab it. And I've had the needle go underneath my fingernail, like halfway up. That's a brutal one.
Dang.
That's a brutal one.
Painful.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah. So yeah.
All right, strike number 2. So, and I'm gonna make.
Was that 20 seconds?
Longer. It's all right. You got the strike called. So for our second pitch, I'm gonna make our producer Adam put his face in his palm, but I'm gonna ask this question anyways. So you're relatively close to Seattle. Are you a Macklemore fan?
Are you?
No, I just feel like this is one of the questions that he's going to be like, I can't believe he asked that one.
Yeah. When he had that video with Ken Griffey Jr., he came to my hometown in Spokane and made that video.
Really?
I like that.
Downtown, I think is that song.
Right.
Yeah.
Downtown.
Yeah.
Don't get me started. It was stuck in my head. But yeah, I like that one.
Nice.
But that's about it.
Nice.
Yeah.
So you're fine.
Yeah.
He's from your state.
He loves the Mariners.
Okay.
Right. And you can't, for a team that's never gone to the World Series, hardly goes to the playoffs, you got to find, you got to rally together certain ways. So yeah, I like Macklemore for being a Mariners fan.
Nice.
Yeah.
So, and for those, so this is our third question here.
Okay.
So I know that photography is a big interest of yours as well. Is that correct?
Oh yeah.
So he was going through our warehouse and he was looking at our glove aisles. He's like, why didn't I bring my camera?
I know. I should.
But check out his Instagram. If you scroll back far enough, you have a lot of cool photos on there. But I was just interested about this because you're into photography. Have you
Mhm.
ever been asked to shoot a wedding?
I have.
Really?
Yeah, I've shot one.
Okay.
I've taken portraits, I've done a lot of stuff like that, but I've shot one. It's so much work. I think there's gonna be people who watch this who have shot wedding photography, wedding shoots, and they're gonna be like, "Oh, yeah, it's a lot of work." I have friends that's their business, like, what they
Yeah.
do every summer.
Mhm.
Oh, I could never do that.
Really?
So and
You can make a ball glove at midnight and, like, whenever your Saturdays are booked up if
booked
you're a
up, make
wedding,
at a wedding
yeah.
and then go make ball gloves. I don't know if that's the life for me. Yeah, I think so I mostly shoot on vintage cameras that are all film.
Okay.
So you have an allotment. I mostly shoot on 35 mil, which means I only got 36 shots.
Okay.
So which isn't good for wedding photography.
There you go.
I mean, I have modern cameras too. I mostly, shoot on Fujifilm, but yeah, when you're shooting film, you're limited. So you have to take your time and make sure your settings are all right, which isn't always the best for weddings. But
Gotcha.
yes, I've shot one
There you
and
go.
I've one and done.
Nice.
Done.
That's fun.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us for
Thank
these
you.
last 2 episodes. This has
Yeah.
been awesome. Lots of gloves. It's never a bad podcast when you end up with like 2 gloves on your lap.
mean,
Last time you had like 5 the last
This is the
episode,
point, right?
so
To
yeah,
talk about gloves.
absolutely.
I told you I was gonna bring a bunch, and
Yeah.
you've been able to look at them and go through the history. So I appreciate you guys having me on and let me be here.
Yeah, absolutely. You guys go check out his website, mackprovisions.com,
Yep,
correct?
yep.
And then he's also got Instagram. Is it at mackprovisions?
Yep,
So
exactly.
yeah,
Yep,
he's
yep.
got great
He's-
stuff on there.
It's on
So
it. Yep.
and for
Yeah.
those of you watching, as always, definitely spread the word about the podcast. If you enjoyed and you're watching on YouTube, give us a thumbs up. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, give us that 5-star review. Till next time, you guys have a great day.
Thank you.